So good evening and welcome to all. And thanks for joining on this cold night and a happy Lag BaOmer. I want to share in a personal event with you tonight, and that is the conclusion of a cycle of Rambam study. I have, for the past 11 and a half months, been studying 3 chapters a day of Maimonides, and today was the last day of a cycle of study. So I want to, with you, learn the last couple of lines of Rambam's book, and then I want to explain to you why I've done this, and delve a little bit deeper into what Rambam has really done for us in that respect. So let me see if I can pull up on this night when technology is not being kind to me. Yeah, this should work. Here we are. If I can pull up the final 2 paragraphs of Maimonides' phenomenal work, Yad HaChazaka, and just read with you and conclude the study cycle that's taken me almost a year to complete. Rambam ends with a description of the Messianic era and how the world is going to be and what's going to happen to the world. And there are going to be some major changes. And Rambam emphasizes that the sages and the prophets who speak so much about their yearning for the Messianic era, it wasn't a question of control, dominion over the entire world, ruling over Gentiles, being the highest of all nations, or eating, drinking, celebrating. All these things are going to happen. That's Rambam doesn't take away from it. But he says the reason why great sages, great prophets spoke about how we long for Mashiach is because in that era, we'll be free to involve ourselves in Torah learning and pursuing wisdom without pressures and disturbances. As Rambam refers to another part of his Magnus Opum, where he talks about the era of Mashiach, that's the laws of Teshuvah, and he says that's what the world's going to be like when there's the Messianic era. And that's why the great people actually longed for that era. In that era, there'll be neither famine nor war. There'll be no envy or competition. Good will flow in abundance, and all delights will be freely available as dust. And the occupation of the entire world will be solely to know God. So yes, all physical threats, all physical dangers, famine, war, competition, envy, that's going to go away. There'll be an abundance of goodness, of delights, of food, of money, and that'll enable us to fully concentrate on understanding Hashem better. And Jews will be great sages. They'll know hidden matters. They'll grasp the knowledge of their Creator according to the full extent of human potential. So the most important accomplishment of the Messianic era is going to be the fact that we're going to be freed of all physical concerns, challenges, threats, and worries, and that's going to enable us to fully appreciate the divine that is in this world. And when that happens, then we're going to suddenly uncover a dimension to this world that we were totally unaware existed. And he quotes to conclude with the words of Isaiah: the world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the ocean bed. Now, when the sea covers the seabed, it's all there under, we just don't see it. Imagine that suddenly the seabed is uncovered and you can now see under the sea. C-S-E-E. You can now suddenly gaze and appreciate something which was hidden before. So that's really what is going to happen when Mashiach comes. There's a divine dimension to this world, which is there all along, and it's suddenly going to be uncovered, and suddenly we're going to appreciate the divine within this world, and that's going to be an absolutely awesome and beautiful, delightful situation. I'm going to, yeah, so that's the conclusion of Rambam, and with that we end the entire book of Rambam, all 14 books thereof, and we conclude Chazak, Chazak, we need Chazak, maybe we be strong and strengthened and have the strength to study further books of Torah. So what we've just studied together are the final words of a book that Maimonides wrote, and he wrote extensively. But he wrote a book called Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah, as you can see here, maybe just change it to the pointer, which is easier there. Mishneh Torah, as you can see, from the word Torah, and Mishneh second. This was second to the Torah. When Maimonides wrote this book in 14 volumes, he wrote it to act as second to the Torah. It was his hope that people would study, obviously, the written text, actual Torah itself, and then they would then move on to the book of Maimonides, Mishneh Torah, which also became known because there are 14 volumes to it as Yad HaChazakah, or the strong hand. When the Jews left Mitzrayim, it says they left with the strong hand of Hashem, and Yad, the hand, is Yud Dalet, that's 14, so they have 14 volumes, even though in this edition there are 9 books, but you can see that some of the books actually combined is more than one kind of section per book. So that's the book of Rambam that we have just concluded. In his introduction to this book, Rambam writes very clearly that Torah on its own, the written text on its own, without the oral law that comes with it, is incomprehensible and incomplete, and that mitzvahs were given to us with an interpretation as part of an oral law. But the passage of time became important to codify and write it down. Of course, the Mishnah Gemara did that, but now we need something which is clearer and which is more accessible, which actually gives the bottom line halacha in each case, and this was what motivated him to write this. And I said Magnus Opum, that's a big Latin word for his major accomplishments. If you go to Rambam's grave, which is in Tiberias, not far from Meron, of course, where thousands are gathering tonight, there's a beautiful walkway up, and along other side of the steps that lead to the actual burial grave site, there are pillars, 7 on each side, and those represent the 14 books of Yad HaChazakah. And on each pillar, it's very hard to actually see, but you can see the first one, Ahava, on the right. That's one of the books. So the 7 pillars are engraved with the names of the books of Rambam that he composed. And it's because of this major accomplishment that Maimonides became known as Hanesher Hagadol, the great eagle. So let me read actually the words of his tombstone to you. Kan Shochen Athar, here lies in the dust the great eagle. Ha'anak, the giant, the Torah, Chochmah, Tuna, Refuah, in Torah, in wisdom, in knowledge, and in medicine. Hevi Refuah lemalchei basar v'adam, he brought healing to human kings of flesh and blood. And Baal Yad HaChazakah, he is the author of this book, Yad HaChazakah, Moshe ben Maimon. It has his date of birth, the 14th of Nisan in the year, the date of his death, the 20th of Tevet, in Cairo, that's Cairo in Egypt. He was buried in Tiberias, so that's his burial place. But what I left for last is this epitaph here. Moshe ad Moshe Kam Moshe. From Moses to Moses, there arose none like Moses. This is how Rambam became known, because of this phenomenal book. So if the written text was given by Moshe Rabbeinu, his contribution to the codification and the availability of the oral law makes his contribution to Judaism and to Jewish law, to Torah, way up there along that which Moshe was able to give. And therefore we say from Moses to Moses, none arose like Moses. I want to read just the very beginning of the intro to the book, and maybe that's going to give us a bit of an inkling of what is so special about this particular very important book. There are other books that deal with halacha. There are many. We have a Shulchan Aruch. There was the Rosh before that, and there was the Rif and so forth. Many books that deal with halacha. Particularly, what's left to us as a codification of law is the Shulchan Aruch, written initially the Tur, and then the book of Jewish Code of Jewish Law as we have it, written by Yosef Karo. It is limited to 4 volumes or 4 books that deal with halacha as is relevant today. Nobody is dealing with laws that are not relevant today. There are certain laws that are only relevant when there's a temple, when the Jews all live in Israel, when the laws of the Jubilee are actually in effect. Maimonides covers the totality of Jewish law. And studying Rambam from beginning to end is therefore a spectacular way of actually grasping the totality of Torah. Of course, you read it all in the 5 books of Moshe, in the actual Chumash. You read about all the mitzvot in the Torah, all 613 are listed there. But the application and the oral law and the details thereof are not mentioned anywhere. Maimonides is the only one that is actually codified in a practical way all laws of the Torah, all 613 commandments, those that apply today, and those that used to apply in the days of the temple, the Jews all lived in Israel, that will apply when Mashiach comes again. It's the only place where you'll find a clear codification of all of those laws. And so, coming back to the introduction of Rambam, what is he saying? Beautiful words. And each section of Rambam is introduced with a verse. Most of those are from Tehillim, and in fact, most of those are from Tehillim, Psalm 119, that famous, very long psalm that's got verses beginning with all the letters of the alphabet, 8 verses for each, the letters of the alphabet. And most of the sections of Maimonides are actually prefaced with a verse from there. What's his introduction to the entire book of Maimonides? This verse here. Then I will not be ashamed when I gaze at all your mitzvot. Az lo evosh ba'abiti el kol mitzvotecha. It appears that it would be almost shameful for one not to have a grasp of the totality of Torah, not to be aware of all of the mitzvahs of the Holy Torah. And the only place that you can really get a full knowledge of Torah from A to Z, from 1 to 613, is in that work of Maimonides. And so he prefaces it by saying, you learned this book, you will not need to be embarrassed that you don't know Torah, because you will walk away knowing the totality of Torah. So what motivated me to embark on this, along with, I will say, many, many Jews all over the world? An initiative which began in 1984. It was at the end of Pesach, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in an address to Farbrengen, a gathering of the Chassidim, launched a revolutionary concept. He said, we need to learn Rambam, and to conclude Rambam in the course of 1 year will involve studying 3 chapters of that book every day. And in just under a year, you can conclude the entire cycle, all 14 books. And in doing that, you will grasp the totality of Torah. And not only that, but the Rebbe was insistent this should be something that the entire Jewish community should get involved in, and that each individual could learn it at his level. So it was unified. It wasn't like each person could follow, their own plan and their own pace, but everybody should be literally, if not on the same page, at least on the same chapter or chapters. And so people are studying it, and for not 41 years, but 41 cycles, because each cycle, as I said, is a couple of weeks short of a year. So since 1984, we've concluded it now 41 times, and I'm pleased and I'm proud that I was on board from very early on, and I was much younger, and my beard was much shorter and much blacker when I started. But I don't think I would attribute any of the white hairs to having to study the Rambam, even though sometimes I stayed up late at night to conclude the quota, but I think that kept me young, if anything. And so since the Rebbe launched that project, I have been studying 3 chapters a day, along with, as I said, thousands of people around the world. And the Rebbe was insistent that there be a way that this could be learned by all people, so that everyone's on the same page or chapter. And so even people who are not able to understand the depth of the actual book, Yad HaChazaka, should study the mitzvot that correspond to those that are in the chapters of it, so that everybody is kind of united in Torah study. So the course of the year, you either conclude the 3 chapters a day of Yad HaChazaka, or Maimonides also wrote in his introduction to Yad HaChazaka, what he calls Sefer HaMitzvot, the book of mitzvahs. In that book of mitzvahs, you go through all 613 commandments, obviously not in as much detail and halachic finality as in the big book. So people who are not able to study the full 3 chapters have the option of doing the mitzvah of the day, and in that way kind of being on the same page or same chapter as the rest of the community. Now, what is behind this particular project? So let me digress for a moment. There are 613 commandments. We were all commanded. We actually told that each of us has to observe them. The Jews at Mount Sinai famously undertook collectively, individually, and also for all future generations that we would observe 613 commandments. In reality, that's not possible. Now, let's look at the words with which the Jewish people undertook to keep 613 mitzvot. Here we are. There we go. Famous verse. And all the people replied in unison and said, all that the Lord has spoken we shall do. Isn't there a word missing? We've been told from time immemorial that the Jews said, Na'aseh v'nishma. There's another verse. This verse is in the portion of Yitro, just before the 10 Commandments are delivered. But part of the preamble to the Aseret HaDibrot is actually found one portion further in Mishpatim, and there's this verse. It says that he took the book of the covenant, read it within the hearing of the people, and they all said, all that the Lord spoke, we will do, we will hear, and hear the famous words, Na'aseh v'nishma. Now, these 2 verses actually explain to us how it is possible to fulfill all 613 commandments. Because technically, it's impossible. Some mitzvot require you to live in Israel. Some mitzvot require you to be a Kohen or a Levi or Israel. Some mitzvot can only be fulfilled by males, and some can only be done by females. So technically, it's not possible to observe all of the 613 commandments. How is it possible to do it? There are 2 ways that this is done. One is through Jewish unity, because we are not separate individuals that are unconnected, but in fact part of one large body. Am Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, is actually like one person, one soul, split into distinct individuals and bodies, but way back, all souls stem from one root, from one place. Therefore, the mitzvah I do covers you if you're unable to do it. Not only that, but that unity doesn't just stretch across the community. So the Kohen does the mitzvah that the Levi can't, and Israel does the mitzvah that the Kohen cannot. It also stretches across genders, but also stretches across geographical boundaries, so that Jews in one area of the world who cannot fulfill a mitzvah because they don't live in the right place are able to fulfill the mitzvah via vicariously those people who are doing it, in the correct place. And that Jewish unity also transcends time, so that we're united as one with the people who fulfilled mitzvot in the times of the Holy Temple, and they could do mitzvahs we cannot do today, but because the unity of Am Yisrael is one that transcends body, that transcends space, and that transcends time, we are all one. That's Jewish unity. The other way it can be done is by studying about a mitzvah. If you cannot perform a particular mitzvah, then learning about it actually allows you to do the best you can under the circumstances, and in that way, by studying the minutiae, the laws, the details of a particular mitzvah, it is considered as if we perform that very mitzvah. And it's actually, if you look at the Siddur in certain places, it's in the small print, but like before davening on Shachris in the morning, we read about some of the sacrifices, some of the temple service, and then in the small print it says, if made the study of these sections be considered as if we had performed this particular service. And the two verses that I shared with you a moment ago actually talk about how Jews commonly took on mitzvahs, and under what conditions they were able to do it all. So here we have the concept of naaseh v'nishma, we will do or we will hear. Our performance will be either in deed, or if not, then it'll be in study. That's one way in which we can fulfill all 613 commandments, even the ones that we are, that are removed from us because of circumstances at a time or space or person. And that's the one dimension. Naaseh v'nishma. We'll do it, or we will hear it, we will listen to it, we will study it. But the other verse tells us about the idea of togetherness. When they took on to do all the mitzvahs, they say it in unison. In other words, we're taking this on communally, collectively, as well as individually, but collectively. And we say all that Hashem has spoken we shall do, and God had just delivered the Aseret HaDibrot, which included 613 commandments. The Jews said, we take this on in unison. All of us cannot perform all the mitzvot all the time, but together we can. So those are the two dimensions by which, through two ways in which the entire Torah can be observed by our people, either through the study of the mitzvot or through Jewish unity. Now, I'd like to suggest that when the Rebbe launched the study of Rambam 41 years, well, not 41 years ago, 41 cycles ago, it was more like 38 years ago. Yeah, 38 years ago in 84. At that point, the Rebbe actually created both of these dimensions. First of all, by creating unity among the entire Klal Yisrael, by encouraging people to be learning Torah together at the same pace, the same chapters every single day, and even those who are not studying the actual chapters of Maimonides are plugged in by studying the mitzvot that correspond to those chapters. At the same time, he also encouraged a learning of a cycle of Torah that allows you to be afay with all the mitzvot. So you're studying the laws of purity and impurity, which actually, are not relevant today, but they're still part of Torah. They're still mitzvot that have to be observed. You read and study about the red heifer, which has not been practiced for thousands of years. You read about offering a korban pesach, as I was discussing. I think it was last week, yes, which we don't do nowadays, but which is so important. And if we cannot physically go up on Temple Mount and offer the sacrifice, we have a dozen chapters in Maimonides that talk about all the laws that are related thereto. We have the laws of kings, and we have every aspect of the 613 mitzvot is covered within those 14 books, 14 sections of Maimonides' Magnus Opum. So by instituting this common learning of Maimonides, the Rebbe actually gave us this gift of the unification of the Jewish people, as well as a study of all the mitzvot, and those are the ways in which we're able to fulfill all 613 commandments, which otherwise would be totally impossible. got a few minutes left, and it is traditional never to just conclude, but always to start again. So I'm going to put up on the screen here the words of the first chapter of Maimonides. And those deal with a very, very deep concept of faith and belief in the one God. Of course, the first mitzvah is to believe that is Hashem. And there Rambam says that the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of wisdom is to know that there's a primary being who brought us into existence. And all beings of the heavens, the earth, everything in between came from the truth of his being, capital H. In other words, it's important, we have to know that there's a primary being, that's a believer in Hashem, and that he was there before anything else. He was always there. And everything comes from his being. That's the foundation of all faith. It's a bit of a long sentence. So that's how Maimonides begins, and it's important when you conclude a cycle to immediately resume with out of the next the next section you're going to be studying, or from the beginning all over again, so that there's no interruption, and there is a link between the beginning and the end. Very, very flowery and poetic, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of wisdom. But look at it on the Hebrew side. Yesod HaYesodot, V'amud HaChochot, foundation of foundations, and the pillar of wisdom. Now, what I want to point out is the initial letters of those four words. So we have a Yud here, we have a Hey, we have a Vav, and we have a Hey. So at the very beginning of Rambam, Hashem's name is alluded to in an acrostic. So the book begins with God, but it doesn't mention him by name. It's just alluded to here with the initial letters creating that acrostic of Hashem's name. But let's go back to that final paragraph of Rambam. What does it say there? The world will be filled with knowledge of God as the waters cover the ocean bed. And the occupation of the whole world will be solely to know God. What's been accomplished in the course of reading through all 14 books, from God simply being there as an acrostic, being alluded to, but not being known. Not only you get a familiarity with God's laws, but in gaining that familiarity with God's laws, you actually discover a new dimension, a deeper understanding and appreciation of Hashem. So whereas in chapter 1, book 1, chapter 1, paragraph 1, Hashem is simply alluded to by a Roshei Tevot, by an acrostic, by the initial letters. At the end of the study, at the end of a full year of study, or however long it takes you, you're now getting a deeper and more powerful understanding of Hashem. So, as I said, chazak to all those who today completed the 41st cycle, or whatever cycle they're up to. Maybe they were not on board in the very beginning. I wish a mazel tov, myself included. And we have now started the new cycle, which begins tomorrow, please God, and which will end in about 11 and a half months from now, sometime next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.